From Social Prosperity Partners, this is Community Catalysts. Welcome to Community Catalysts, the podcast that examines the qualities of community leadership and the many paths and forms it can take. I'm your host, Matt Lehrman. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you're likely aware that my work here is deeply inspired by Otis White, the founder and now retired CEO of Civic Strategies. In addition to his groundbreaking research and long career in the community decision-making process, from 2011 to 2015, he produced a podcast in partnership with the Georgia Municipal Association that set out to learn from community leaders responsible for helping their communities achieve significant results. Those podcasts aren't available anywhere else, so I am beyond grateful for his permission to re-release them here, where they can be instructive and inspiring to new generations of community leaders. In just a minute, we'll play an episode in which he sits down with Frank Turner, former city manager and foundation trustee in Covington, Georgia, to discuss how local foundations can be successful partners in community development. But first, I recently asked Otis to share some perspective about the nature and causes of incivility today and whether some divisive community topics are just always too hot to handle. So much community decision-making today is characterized by political division and social media and the spread of misinformation and disinformation. And there's examples all over the place of suspicion and incivility and anger and just outright obstinance. Do you think that situation today is markedly different? Obviously, the social media is different, but is the overall situation different from what it would have been 25 or 50 years ago?
I think it's a little worse than it would have been 25 or 50 years ago, simply because there is I think two things. The ease of spreading bad ideas. It's so much easier to spread bad ideas than it was then. Secondly, there seems to be some profit in dividing people. I don't understand how it becomes a business model to make people angry at one another, but it somehow has become a business model.
Well, isn't it true that from social media and local newspapers, it's all click-driven? So the more people who click on it and the longer they spend on your site, that's what's being monetized. So you're monetized for the outrage and the attention that you get rather than the substance of what's actually being discussed.
Yes, I mean, it's disturbing. I'm not sure, but this is a supply and demand problem as well. That is, we're talking about the supply here, part of it. But the demand part of it is that for some reason, people want to be angry at other people. And maybe the solution isn't to concentrate that much on the supply side, but reduce the demand for it. And the way to do that is to introduce people to folks who do not agree with them, don't even look like them, come from places they can't even imagine, and yet allow them to meet one another and see that while I don't agree with you on a lot, you're an okay person. And you know what? Cities are built for that kind of introduction. That's where the urbanism may be a partial solution to the division part of problems.
I've been interviewing a number of mental health professionals who actually say that what we have is an addiction to outrage. And it feeds the dopamine, it feeds our attention, and it is something that's going to be very hard for us as a society to escape.
Well, we've overcome big problems in this country in the past, and we can do this.
Otis, what do you see as a city or a town council's responsibility for increasing trust in the process of local government? And have you seen any community do that particularly well?
Yes, I live close to a place called Decatur, Georgia, and it is a very small. It's sometimes called the perfect cross between Berkeley, California, and Mayberry, North Carolina. Small town, very urban. It's probably the most densely built city in Georgia, and it has a wonderful little town square, and it has probably the greatest involvement of citizens of any place I've ever seen. So yes, there are places that have connected citizens in remarkable ways, and Decatur has sort of cracked the code on that. And it's done because they are so deliberate at keeping the citizens involved. They have a program called Decatur 101, which teaches people about how the city government works. They have a police academy where they teach citizens about how law enforcement works in the community. They have tons of volunteer opportunities. They have a professional volunteer coordinator who works with the city government. And they have festivals and everything else they can do to get people to come together in that lovely little town square and meet one another. And it may be the happiest place I have been outside of Disney World.
Otis, tell us what you've learned about what are some of the third rail issues in communities, those priorities or concerns that can absolutely destroy leaders who touch them, whether intentionally or not.
I don't know that there is any issue that can't be approached if done the right way. And obviously, race and ethnicity and gender and feelings of unfairness are emotionally difficult topics. But I'm not sure even those cannot be approached if they're done in the right way.
Let me give you an example from my hometown in Scottsdale. One of the third rails that is out here is anything that would compromise property values.
Yes, feeling a threat to your bottom line can sometimes be difficult. But I think back on the many things that governments have over the last 200 years convinced people to pay for that 200 years ago they would have thought was ridiculous. I'll give you an example. Public education. It was not seen as the responsibility of government until the middle of the 19th century. So convincing folks that somehow they should pay taxes so that other people's children should be educated is an extraordinary feat in American government. And it's because what they saw as their self-interest, that is the narrowness of protecting my purse every year from the tax man, was overcome by the understanding that, yes, those children that we're educating today will be productive workers who will make all of us much richer in the future. So even property values, it depends on what you're proposing, but if it makes the community stronger, if it brings in more people, you're going to benefit from it as well. You're going to live in a nicer community. You're probably financially going to benefit from it. So again, we've gone a long way in persuading people to collectively do things that once were seen as impossible.
It sounds like what you're saying is that there are, or at least there should be, no unmentionables in terms of community decision making.
Yeah. I don't think the subjects are the problem. I think the approach is the problem.
You'll hear more from my interview with Otis White in future episodes, but for now, let's listen to his Civic Strategies episode, in which he visits with Frank Turner, former city manager and foundation trustee in Covington, Georgia.
Hello and welcome to Civic Strategies, a podcast about cities and their leaders, produced in cooperation with the Georgia Municipal Association. I'm Otis White. On our show today is Frank Turner, the former city manager of Covington, Georgia, and a trustee in a family foundation that has played a big role in how Covington and its surrounding county, Newton, has turned out. I'll explain about Frank Turner and the foundation in a minute, but first, a bit about Covington. It's a city of about 12,000 people, about 35 miles due east of Atlanta. It's also a place with so many beautiful old homes and buildings that it has 2 historic districts. In fact, the chances are good that you've seen Covington if you watched the TV series In the Heat of the Night in the late 1980s and early 1990s. It was filmed here, as were dozens of other TV shows and movies that needed a beautiful southern town as its backdrop. Frank Turner's own ties to the city go deep. He grew up here, his family was in business in Covington, and he came back here in 1970 after serving as a naval officer. He planned to get a PhD at a university in Atlanta, but fate intervened. Covington's city manager job was open. The city needed someone to fill in for a while, and Frank Turner agreed to do it until the city found somebody else. It never did, and he stayed for 36 years until retiring in 2006. It was during that long tenure that he and some other family members became trustees of what's called the Arnold Fund. It's a family foundation that includes the inheritance of his aunt and uncle, who were prominent in Georgia business and public life. Over the years, it had been used to fund arts programs and educational institutions in Covington and Newton County, but in the 1990s, the trustees turned it into an instrument of community development. Among other things, the Arnold Fund paid to have architect and planner Otis White come to town to talk about new urbanism and compact growth. It helped convince a public college to establish a campus here. It helped create a unique institution called the Center, which is both a meeting place for community groups and an organization that helps the city and county engage the citizens in planning decisions. And the Arnold Fund has taken a hand in development itself, buying land and building houses that demonstrate new urbanist principles. And the person at the center of all these things is Frank Turner. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Otis.
To begin, could you tell us a little bit about the Arnolds and how you became a trustee of the foundation they created?
Well, it is a long-standing foundation, but of course the principal was my aunt, Florence Turner Arnold. And upon her deciding she no longer wanted to serve on the board, it was suggested that I serve as a trustee on the board. And I began to serve then with my first cousin, Rob Fowler, who was the chairman, and another cousin, a long-range cousin, David Arnold.
Now, you were the city manager when you became a trustee. Did you know right away how the foundation could help Covington's development?
Now, when I first came on, it was purely eleemosynary area. They were doing the Newton County Arts Associations, college scholarships, foundation work that benefited students in the colleges of Georgia.
How did it turn toward community development?
I think it was the coming of the big boxes and the downtown Covington, the central square, which is so attractive, began to lose its major businesses. And the Arnold Fund said, maybe we can not reverse this, but try to make it a prosperous thing where people will do better with the development and get a little bit more attractive situation than where we see abandoned downtowns all over the state.
Now, is that the point at which you invited Otis White to come to Covington? And how did you know about him, and what did you expect him to do?
Well, I think we knew about him because of the main thing that people think about was Seaside. It was so attractive, and people would ride by and see Seaside.
Now, that's the planned community, the sort of new urbanist community in the panhandle of Florida.
Yes, and we thought he would be a really good person to support this. We had a person with us who could recommend him, and we asked him would he come, and he came, brought, I think, 20 or 30 people with him who made sketches. He held seminars daily with different topics, and I guess he had 50 to 60 people per day. Oddly enough, in a store that had closed.
And was it helpful? I mean, did he give good ideas, and did it really move things along?
I think it was a great deal of help. He gave some really great ideas, some of which were taken and were seen to be good ideas. He suggested we put better lighting around the square, which we did, and that made a big difference. He made some suggestions to merchants, but most of them said he's never run a store, and sort of ignored what his recommendations were. I think they were very sound. By and large, I think his efforts were not totally accepted, but the things that he did recommend that were accepted have been successful and improved their value.
Now, one of the things that the Arnold Fund went on to do, I understand, is to commission a master plan for the city of Covington. How important was that to the city's development?
Well, actually, that was done by the center that you recommended earlier. That the center came up with that. Arnold Fund did not come up with a master plan because we felt like it was necessary that you have total community input, as total as you can get. You can't get everybody. But we got as many people as we could to come to the meetings and have input into what they wanted Newton County to look like. And it has come to the fore now in a plan called the 2050 plan, which they hope will be used and help develop not only Covington, but Newton County in the decades to come.
Now, for a period of time, you were the city manager and you were a trustee at the same time of a foundation that was getting increasingly active in the city's development. Now, how did you, in your own mind, how did you decide this is appropriate for the city to do, and this is something that maybe the foundation would do better?
Well, it was sort of a mutual agreement between the mayor and council and the board as to what we would do. And then some of it was purely financial, like when Dwani came, his fees were substantial. Paying Dwani did not count as a contribution, and you had to get rid of 5% of your corpus every year. The city said, well, why don't we pay half of it? So it did work out that they paid half of Dwani and we paid half of Dwani. Other projects like the roundabout, which has been a very successful thing, the Arnold Fund started with a great deal of the planning on that. The state of Georgia was just diametrically opposed to it. They wouldn't even consider it. So the Arnold Fund did a great deal of planning on that, sketching, gave it to the city. When we started, they said this roundabout would cost $350,000. I think we put in $150,000 toward the planning. Had trouble getting a little bit of the property right away from the county, oddly enough, which we thought was city property, but the county owned it by some deed quirk. Then the crunch came, and we had all these federal monies come down since 2008, and the feds took it on as a project, and it has now cost $1.3 million, and it is in place. But it was started by the Arnold Fund with a great deal of planning. The city then got in it and put the federal funds into it when they were available.
So it's a partnership. I mean, the approach of the fund and the city and the other governments have been that of partnership. As you sort of think about this, what is the part of the partnership that the foundation is very good at, and what part of the partnership is the government good at?
The government is good at getting things done. If you want state or federal participation, they want to know, do the local elected officials concur with this? And historically, with very few exceptions, I think in the early 70s this was not true, but since the early 70s, the city-county government relationships have been truly outstanding. And you would get concurrence on projects, endorsement, and participation with local matches once you got them going, encouragement by meetings at the center where they would see people were in favor of it, not just something they didn't know what it was.
Well, it sounds a little bit like from the description of the roundabout that maybe foundation is very good at starting things, but the government is good at taking it on from a certain point and finishing it.
Absolutely. I mean, that's absolutely the truth on that.
Now, is there a downside to having a prominent foundation in a city? Does it make citizens complacent about their own giving?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's like if they want that done, let's let the Arnold Fund pay for it. They've got all the money in the world, let them pay for it. We saw that with the Arts Association. For years, we've totally funded the Arts Association, and it was fun. It was lots of fun. We had lots of good concerts. We then were unsure of money, but the contributions just didn't flow in, even though people enjoyed coming to the concert. It didn't flow in because it was an Arnold Fund thing.
Is there anything that the foundation invested in that, looking back on it in hindsight, you sure wish it hadn't?
I don't see anything we invested in that I wish we hadn't. The investments that we made, I wish we had done differently. We bought sizable pieces of property. At the time, the fund was adequate to have purchased those properties outright. Good financial advice is don't use your money, leverage your money. And we did. And things have gone south, and we have tremendous notes to pay, lots of property taxes, and tremendous notes to pay. My advice to foundations or funds is if you can afford it, do it. Don't borrow somebody else's money to do it. If you can match it with federal or state or local funds, do it, but don't go out and borrow.
If a foundation CEO in some other city were to come here and ask you, we want to get involved in community development in some form, what would you tell him he should do and what would you tell him he shouldn't do?
I would tell them not to borrow money, as I've indicated before, but I would tell them definitely to try to create an institution like the Center here for Preservation and Growth. I think it has just been very rewarding. As you can see, if anybody comes, you can see the charts on the wall. They change regularly, and you can see the growth patterns, what can happen what is predicted to happen if we keep growing with like we have, and what we can do if we have controlled and proper growth. And it's really exciting. That would be what I would recommend they do, first of all.
And if a mayor or a city manager somewhere else wanted to get his or her local foundation interested in community development, is there some advice you can give a local official who says, gee, I sure would like to get my local big foundation involved in this?
Our fund has never been prominent in putting our name on things, because we haven't been seeking that sort of thing. But most of the foundations with which I'm familiar, they love to have their name on something. Tell them if they'll do something, we'll name it after your foundation, or we'll name it after you as chairman, or something like that. We try to stay away from that, from the reason that we talked about before, that people say all they want is their name on a plaque.
So a little recognition probably would go a long way.
I think it does with most of the foundations.
Well, my guest has been Frank Turner, the former city manager and foundation trustee in Covington, Georgia, talking about how foundations can be successful partners in community development. This has been Civic Strategies. I'm Otis White. Thanks for listening.
As always, my sincere thanks and appreciation to Otis White for sharing his Civic Strategies podcast with listeners of Community Catalysts. You'll find a link to his Civic Strategies website in the program notes, and I encourage you to make good use of the wealth of insights and resources that he still offers there. This episode was produced by Kerry Lengel and edited by Nick Living the Dream Tantillo. Jenna Maisel is our production assistant. Our executive producer is John Little. I'm Matt Lehrman of Social Prosperity Partners. If you have a question, comment, or story to share, reach me at 602-688-2724 or podcast at socialprosperity.us. I'd love to hear from you. We'll be back soon with another Community Catalyst.